Joining us now for more on this is former KGB agent Jack Barsky. He is the author of Deep Undercover, My Secret Life, and Tangled Alliances as a KGB Spy in America. Jack is also the subject of a 12-part audio drama called The Agent, which is a series based on his life. Jack, thanks for joining us. You're really the man to talk to right now as Vladimir Putin is ramping up his aggression against the West and so-called national traitors. Carter and I have been really interested in this. Tell us from your perspective, what do his recent threats and increasingly violent rhetoric tell you about his mindset?
Well, I do believe he feels trapped right now. When he started this thing, I was expecting problems because I know how Ukrainians feel about Russians, not necessarily the Russian citizenry, but the Russian government. They hate it with a vengeance, and so now he can't just like pretend that things are going very well, even though he said that yesterday. Everything's going as per plan, but he lost 2 or 3 generals and several thousand soldiers already, and he still hasn't gotten Kiev. Okay, so his pattern has been in other similar wars to escalate, and unfortunately that means he's going to go after more civilians. It's a sad thing, a sad spectacle to watch.
You know, it's incredible that we're actually able to talk to a real-life KGB spy about this sort of thing. You've got the information, you've got the inside track here. What's the greatest threat to Putin right now? Is it the sanctions from the West, or does he have a right to be concerned and fear his people in his own country right now?
Sanctions for sure, but he doesn't really care as much about the suffering of the Russian people. You heard him, you know, he's now lashing out against his own people. And the segment you had before where, you know, Russians and Ukrainians are getting along, This is his war, and it's the war of himself and his coterie. With regard to what is a threat to him, I would think it's long term. Assuming that he can survive this, assuming that there's not going to be some kind of a coup against him, so long term. He'll be in trouble if this keeps on going like this, and more soldiers are dying. He'll have Afghanistan on his hand, and as you know, Afghanistan was the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union, and Ukraine may well become the beginning of the end of Putin as a dictator.
Jack, I want to follow up on that threat because, as you say, he's not concerned about the suffering of the Russian people, but how much are domestic politics driving him? I know right before the invasion, the Duma had passed legislation to recognize those parts of the Ukraine that had Russian-speaking populations as separate entities, and then he followed through with this. Is a coup a very real possibility, given what you know, and how much is Putin trying to respond to that right now?
Well, he's very well protected, and whatever happened in the Duma, this was all staged. You know, he still has a tight grip on power as long as he maintains, as long as he satisfies his inner circle, the folks that are directly supporting him. He doesn't have much to fear unless, and this is a potential long-term real scenario, unless the military revolts, because what he's doing right now is actually weakening the Russian military. But this is all speculative. I don't believe in the short term there will be much of a change, and the man is extremely well protected.
Yeah. Jack, you know, you also said one other thing that I wanted to follow up on, which is that Afghanistan was such a debacle for the USSR, leading to the fall of the Soviet Union. Putin at that time was a low-ranking officer in the KGB when the Soviet Union fell back in 1991. It seems like so much of his motivation right now is to try and reassemble the USSR. Tell us how the collapse, how his mindset from that formative moment in his career may be driving his actions right now.
That is a very good question. So this is what Vladimir Putin was a mid-level agent in the city of Dresden in East Germany, and the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, and at that time there were a lot of demonstrations. The East Germans were actually storming Stasi offices. And a bunch of East Germans showed up in front of the KGB office where Putin was stationed. The guards initially sent them away, but they told them that if you come back, we might shoot. And they did come back. Now, Putin gets on the phone with Berlin and asked them to get permission to shoot. And Berlin told him, we just reached out to Moscow. Moscow is silent. So Vladimir Putin went from being a member of the most powerful organization, living the good life in East Germany, to somebody who was completely helpless defending that position. I think that left a deep impression in him, and it motivated him to rebuild not necessarily the Soviet Union, but Greater Russia. This is what he's after. And he pretty much stated this, not directly but indirectly, when he said the greatest the tragedy of the 20th century was the fall of the Soviet Union.
Right, and how he felt about Gorbachev. Jack Barsky, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.